why are we talking about masculinity in 2025?
Well, no one had to talk about masculinity when it was the norm. You know, when masculinity was, everyone was just, there were certain expectations of society. And that was, no one talked about masculinity. And then what happened is that, you know, there's this long train of things that happened. Obviously, the Industrial Revolution and feminism and all these things that slowly took men away from certain kinds of roles and put them in this protected space. You could almost call it a child space, like where they don't have to deal with the defense of things. They don't have to, they're taken care of. You know, in modern life, masculinity is fairly optional unless you live in a place that is in conflict. Or a bad neighborhood or something like that. But in modern life, masculinity is somewhat optional. So men are taken care of in much the same way that women always have been. So they can afford to, you know, run their mouths and know that no one's going to hit them, and they can do all this passive aggressive behavior. And so this has just moved through culture over, you know, decades and decades. And what happened is that you saw this with the gender theory things that I saw in the 90s, but then became very big just recently with all the trans things and so forth. And all these people, all these feminists were working for a few decades of redefining masculinity and talking about masculinity, making it negative, and saying that it doesn't exist, saying that it's not real. And these are all products of Marxism and queer theory and gender studies and so forth. And those people were all under the radar until about like 2010. And no one talked about masculinity because no one needed to. And then all of a sudden, you know, these people started to gain influence. And we started to see a lot more in mainstream culture. And so then you had people saying ridiculous things about men and masculinity, and all of a sudden people started to wake up. And really when the trans thing reached its peak, then we're past peak right now, which is nice. But when it reached its peak, you had a whole bunch of people saying, you know, men and women didn't exist, all these things didn't exist. And so it became very necessary. And that was why I wrote The Way of Men earlier. I saw that problem happening, is that men couldn't articulate what masculinity is. And so you have all these gender studies PhDs who are then articulating it for them, you know, with their own agenda and pasting it onto it. And men needed to be able to articulate masculinity in a coherent way. And that was my project with The Way of Men.
So it sounds like you're talking about postmodernism being quite destructive.
Yeah. And postmodernism, obviously, just a reaction to modernism and the disappointment in modernism. I think that's what postmodernism really is, right? Like the collapse of meaning that was really foreseen by Nietzsche in a certain way.
Who is Jack Donovan?
A 50-year-old man.
Yes, but you are a lot fitter. You're a lot fitter than every other 50-year-old man that I know.
I do try. And I think it's important because I write about masculinity. I try to at least exemplify some things. I mean, you can't be the exemplar for all things masculine. I started writing about masculinity because it was interesting to me as a topic. And I really wanted to understand what it was. Most men who talk about masculinity are marketing. They're talking about their masculinity. They're like putting themselves forward as the exemplar of masculinity. And you see that, you know, all over the internet now. I mean, you really didn't have that as much like when I wrote The Way of Men, but now there's all these guys being like, here's what you need to do to be a man like me. And, you know, and that's what most of this masculinity discourse is now. Or you have like, you know, priests and pastors and things like that being like, this is how you need to be a man for God. Or all these, everyone wants to capitalize on male insecurity. Is what's really happening. Is no one wanted to talk to men or care what happened to them until they realized that there was money there, and now they can find different ways to make men insecure. And advertisers knew this a long time ago. I mean, you want to sell a truck, here's what you do to sell it to men. But now there's all these men's coaches and all these people selling men their way to be masculinity. But when I wrote The Way of Men, I just had a project. I've been like, let's figure out what this is, and it's not about me being. It's not like about be like me. But to answer your question, I guess I'm a 50-year-old man who I went to art school. I was probably a feminist when I was a young kid. Certainly. I mean, I was probably a liberal and a feminist. Like, I went to art school. What do you think?
I also went to art school.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There you go. So I came at this from a different angle than I think a lot of the people come at, but that's why I think I was able to articulate it better than that. So, I lived in New York and San Francisco and LA, and really it was only in my 30s that I became really interested in masculinity and what maybe I had missed in believing everything that they told me about men, and that men were bad, and masculinity was outdated and out of fashion and old and whatever. And so when I began revisiting that for myself, that's when I started becoming interested in this project of understanding masculinity better. And so, I started talking about it as a good thing, and someone was reading my work and saying that I wasn't defining it very well. I'm like saying, being a man is good, but you're not really saying anything. Like, you're not defining it, and that's why I wrote The Way of Men. So that's, I guess, me in a nutshell. The older I get, the more I think I'm like, I should have just been an artist. But I was trying to draw for the past 3 or 4 days. I've been working on that. So that's really my background. I care about beauty and articulating these ideas in a different way, in a visual sense. And I think that's always been part of who I am. So obviously, you said you like my set and whatever, and I have a different visual presentation than I think a lot of people do when they talk about masculinity. But yeah,
Jack, what is masculinity?
What is masculinity? That is the question. And my answer to what is masculinity is that it's, when we're talking about it, we're talking about masculinity, we're talking about the way we perceive each other, maybe without even words. The way you can walk into a room and you can kind of rate masculinity among a group of men without having them even talk. You can, by their body language. And so to understand what that thing was, that thing that what are we sensing that we can't necessarily put our finger on? I was like, well, what cues are we reading? And what I came around to was that we're reading the primal cues that we would have needed through most of human history. What have men been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years? And my answer is that in the scope of human evolution, most of the time, men have been working in groups together. And they hunting and fighting, and that's most of our human evolutionary history. The idea that we go to an office is very new. For most of human history, men worked together. They had to take down big prey. They had to protect their village from invading villages. That's pretty consistent, and it's consistent across the whole world. And so you have these hunting and fighting gangs, and what masculinity is, like the core primal element of masculinity is, what do these men need from each other? Like, how are they evaluating each other as men? And so that's how I came around to the tactical virtues. Like, what do men who are hunting and fighting together, what do they need from each other? And I came up with strength, courage, mastery, and honor. You could rename them, you could do all kinds of things, but they're good general rules of thumb for talking about, well, what are we seeing in men? Like, is he strong? Is he capable? Is he physically capable? You can walk into a room and see that. Is he courageous or is he cowardly? You can see that in body language. to a certain extent between different men. And these are all cues. It's like, oh, well, that guy is a threat. That guy is not a threat. Like we see all these things, and our body sees them. In the way that if you have dogs, like they know what's going on. They don't understand what you're saying at all, but they know what's going on. Like we have that too. Like we sense things from each other that aren't necessarily, we don't have to articulate to see them. And that's why now we have, when you see AI, you get into the uncanny valley, because you'll see something like, that's not a human thing. Like that's off. Like we can sense something's wrong there. And so you have strength, courage, mastery, like, capability. Like what can someone do? Men appreciate virtuosity, I think, more than, if you're really good at something, men really, it doesn't, you don't have to be, like women have to worry about being pretty. They have to worry about all these other things. Men are like, wow, he is really good at this one thing. And they can appreciate that just for that. And that gives a man value. And it gives a man value to men. And where I think a lot of anthropologists and evolutionary biologists and so forth skip over, because they're always looking for how you're going to mate. Like everything's a mating competition with those kind of people. But I think that men pre-screen each other for women. In the sense of like men compete for status with each other. And then the highest status men get the choice of women. Like that's, and I think that people don't talk about that as much. Like they just think we're competing like a little contest for girls. And I think that men compete with each other and they have their own status hierarchy. And you can see this in the modern world, like men in business. So we're like, he's a very successful businessman, therefore he's high status, therefore women want him. It's not like we're like racing each other to see who gets the girl. Like men have their whole like status hierarchy without that. And then, obviously strength, courage, mastery, and then honor is that, what does a group of men need from each other? And that is loyalty. And honor is essentially loyalty and showing that you care about your reputation within a group of men. Now, you can't care about every group of men, but honor is basically like within this group of men, what is your reputation? And if you care about that and show that you care about the group and what they think of you, then that is reciprocated. And if you say that you don't care about what the group thinks, then you aren't trustworthy. Like they can't trust you as a man if you don't care what they think of you as a man. So those are the four tactical virtues that I talked about in The Way of Men. And, I wrote that book maybe like 12 years ago now. And I still agree with it. I think that it continues to be correct in the way that, men behave. We are kind of pack animals. And that's one of the biggest problems, and maybe goes back to your question about why are we talking about masculinity in 2025, is that we have, I almost forgot where I was going to go with that. Oh yes, why are men insecure? A lot of men are insecure, and they're insecure. And that's why all these coaches and all these people can sell them their different masculinity products, is because men who are not validated by within a group of men are more insecure. Like we've spent our entire evolutionary history being like, if these guys think I'm all right, then I'm okay. Like that's our identity. That's where we get our identity from. And you can't get an identity from an identity like that. You can't get that from a woman, because also then if she leaves you, then you actually have nothing. So that's bad. But there's a certain confidence that comes with, okay, well, I have this group of guys who all think I'm a good guy. They all respect me. I've earned their respect in some way. And men who have that have a different level of confidence than men who don't have that. And so if men don't have that, then they're looking for that kind of validation in some way. And then so anyone who tries to sell them that validation, that they're very easy prey. for that. Whereas if you have a bunch of guys who think you're a cool guy, you maybe don't have to buy this thing or buy this other thing or take this course or whatever to show that you're a man, because these other men already think you're a man. Like these other men always are, you already have validation with that group. And so I think any way that you can be kind of initiated and accepted into a group of men, or informally or formally, that adds to your sense of security as a man in the world. So I think that, that's what men should really seek out, is if you don't have any kind of gang like that, and it's really hard. It's really hard to find groups of men in the real world. But that's why I always tell men, I do jiu-jitsu. That's one place where it's like, I have a reputation, like in that group, like Jack was going to do this. He's going to do this. He's going to do this. Like he's a hassle in this way, but this one person can get him in this thing every time. Like I have this, like this is how he conducts himself. And so people recognize that when they come to a room, whether it's good or bad. Like I have a reputation within a group of men. And, obviously in the larger world as an author, I have a reputation with a group of men. And I have a group that I run called the Order of Fire. And so, but if you have none of that, imagine a dude who basically has no friends, or just has a few friends. Yeah, well, that's a lot of guys. Like a lot of guys don't have more than like one or two people they can even call. So, that's the way the modern world is, because it keeps us all very separate. Like it's like, once upon a time, there are people who still live where they grew up, and that's like, okay, well, these are my friends from high school, and I still see them at the mall, or I still see them wherever I go. But there are a lot of people who, they move, as I have, like around the world, to different cities and so forth. And yeah, they don't really have a connection with anybody. And you really have to go out of your way to build it, that was the goal, really. Like what is always true about masculinity? Because the gender studies people and so forth who were taking apart masculinity, they wanted to say, oh, well, this is different here and this is different here. And here are all the little differences between, and there are so many. You talk to different groups of men, and what type of car is okay for a man to drive or whatever becomes so fluid. Like it's so different from group to group. But, they're guys who will die on that hill, like, no, a man should not drive this thing, but that'll change from place to place. That changes from social class to social class, group to group. But what is always true? And wherever you are in history and wherever you are in the world, now there are always outliers in like this weird society of monks or whatever. But if you take the mainstream of any culture that survived for any length of time, would any of those men say it's better for a man to be weak? Like nowhere is that true. Like always and everywhere, it is better to be stronger as a man. Masculinity is directly connected physically and whatever metaphorically to strength. Is it better for a man to be a coward? Like said no man anywhere. Like that no men have never said masculinity. One of the things that we value in men is cowardice. No one ever says that. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish. It doesn't matter where you are. It's good for men to be cowardly. No one says that ever. And the thing is, these virtues, that's why that was my criteria for them. Is this always true? And the thing is that women can have all those qualities. A woman can be strong. A woman can be courageous. Women, they can say, yeah, no one cares. Like they don't say that she's less of a woman. No one says a woman is less of a woman because she's weak, like physically weak. Like no one cares. A woman is less of a woman because she's a coward. No, well, she still makes babies, right? It's like a bonus thing that they can have. They can be strong, they can be courageous, they can be really good at things, but as long as they're women either way, that status is. But if a man is really weak and really cowardly, and is always isn't really good at anything, and is always like, help me, help me, help me, I'm not self-sufficient. Like, men will think he's less of a man. He will be viewed as being less masculine, and that's why I think these virtues and this way of looking at masculinity holds up, because it holds up always and everywhere for men.
But it's also important to note that the virtues that you're talking about are not the caricatures that we see in Hollywood and in comics and that sort of thing. It's not the caveman dragging a woman, or it's not a guy like Trump who walks into a room and suddenly you assume that he's masculine, because that's also theatrics. You're talking about something a lot deeper.
Yeah, I mean, there's theatrics is part of it. Like men can create that. Like George Washington was very, very concerned about, this is how I should be portrayed, and this is like how you should see me for history. But yeah, I mean, there's big theatrical confidence, which is kind of a marketing thing, I think, is what you're saying. And then there's, I'm just secure. Yeah, like you don't have to necessarily be loud about it. In fact, like it's like there's that big thing of like men who are always talking about being alpha are
yes,
probably
that's
not
where I was going.
That. Yeah, like that. Yeah, the big. Yet I hate that word. I hate alpha. Like I think that's a signal. It's a marketing word. I know why men use it, and I've friends and guys who I respect who use that as a marketing word, because it's the way you reach young men. Is like, say, you want to be more alpha. What they're really saying is you want to be more masculine. Yeah. Because alpha signifies a status in a group, and male hierarchies are flexible. You're not always like, I could be the alpha in the room, and then Trump walks in and I'm not the alpha in the room. Or whoever has the most power becomes in that particular group. Or like, say you're in a group that does chess, and there's the chess alpha, and then you go to the jiu-jitsu, and there's the jiu-jitsu alpha, and there's the boxing alpha, and so male status hierarchies are very flexible, and who is the most important man in the room can change. But what they're really trying to sell young men by saying alpha is really this thing that I'm talking about. Like, is he assertive? Does he look confident? Is he strong? Does he have a presence when he walks in the room? All these things that are associated with masculinity is what they're associating with alpha. And they make it like it's this type that you're either alpha or beta. Like, you can only be one of the two. But I think that men are just more complicated than that. We're not, yeah.
No, I was going to say, but you can kind of see if somebody is a legacy alpha or legacy beta. I mean, you can.
Yeah. Like the most submissive guy in the room is going to be beta, but he's also going to have the less of all the qualities that I talked about. Like it's basically, he's just lower on the masculinity scale than the guy who's super alpha is going to be very sure of himself. I mean, that's really what it comes down to a lot. And unfortunately, that's really kind of a problem that we're seeing. I think now is that you have men who are very confident. And if you say anything with confidence, people will gravitate towards you. It doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. But if you say, hey, buddy, the sky is red. Yeah. It's red. It's been red. It's always been red. They're lying to you. All right. Like if you say that with confidence, people are like, fuck me, the sky is red. That's the thing. That's the problem. It's like, you can say anything with confidence, and you have a lot of big influencers, and if you say it with confidence, a lot of people will just follow it and believe it. And that's what it's about. So people have learned how to mimic confidence, I think, to sell things. In many cases, a good case, because I guess he's on my mind because his documentary just came out, and I had the pleasure of meeting him in person, was Liver King. Liver King came across as very, very confident. like in his message, like everything that he said was true, and tons and tons of people believed him. I've met him in person. I believed him. Like he was a charismatic guy. He's really there's a lot to like about him. Apparently, I mean, he lies a little bit, but I've known some other guys who came off very well who also lied a little bit. So sometimes they do that, but the confidence is what comes across. And if you start saying like, okay, primals, this is what we're doing, then young men are like, sign me up. Let's go. It doesn't matter if what you're saying is right or not. It just, if you deliver it with confidence, people respond to it. There's a handful of virtues that people talk about in the way that there's not a lot new under the sun. You can read Aristotle and Plato, and they're talking about the same things that we're talking about today. And I'm specifically interested in the concept of virtue right now, and that's kind of where my work is going. And yeah, when you talk about virtue, you're having the same discussion that they've been having since ancient Greece. So like, yeah, a lot of, there are only so many like human positives and negatives, I guess, like is the way that you could look at it, like what is good and what is bad. Like there are people talking about temperance as a virtue, like self-control. And that's this thing that's just this recurring theme that people talk about over and over again, because it's human. Like there are things that are specific to people, and I think that's one of the things that we really got away from in like the whole, I guess, boomer experiment, is that like this idea that there was that idea that humans are a blank slate. You could, if the government changes, you can change human nature.
I think Steven Pinker wrote about that. Sorry.
Yeah, that is actually Steven Pinker was my gateway. His book, The Blank Slate, was a big life-changing book for me. That was like in the early 2000s, I think, that came out, and yeah, that was a major frame shift for me, and that's where I first started to get interested in evolutionary psychology and things like that. Was because there was that period where they basically the boomer generation, I think, redesigned society based on the idea that we don't have a human nature. And right now we're in this place where we're watching all of that fall apart. Because, okay, you had X amount of years to because human nature is real. Because we, just like any other animal, there are things that you can expect my dogs to do because they're dogs. Like not because they were trained to do this or whatever, but because they're dogs. And the same thing is true of people. And the way we just talked about it, like we've been talking about the same discussion about virtues for thousands and thousands of years. Why? Because people have a nature and they have recurring problems that are the same problems all around the world. And if you don't address those things, what Kipling called it, the gods of the copybook headings. He has that great poem, and it doesn't matter exactly what he says the gods of the copybook headings are, but there are certain human realities that if you ignore them, you will be punished for it. And that's what we're seeing now is happening. Like all the things that, they said, women and men are totally interchangeable. We could just put them in the workplace. Oh, well, surprise, you have a really low birth rate all around the world. like, oh, well, that's a consequence of that thing. Like here's that experiment, and here are the consequences of that. If you don't prioritize, families in society, people won't have them. Like that's something that needs to happen. And so like all these human realities don't go away. And that's where I think we get into human nature and the experience of being human.
But Jack, so you mentioned declining birth rates, for example. So does masculinity matter when it comes to family? I mean, it seems to be an independent variable. It can exist regardless.
It can. I mean, a good example would be Shackleton or something like men can be on a ship and masculinity has its own realm. Like they can be on a sailing ship on an adventure for years and years and years, never see a woman, and masculinity exists in its own space, right? It's totally independent of women. But one of the reasons why I think it's important for children to have a father and a mother is because they obviously model the two sexes, and if your dad is a loser, that's your model for masculinity. And so like, like it's also obviously important in the home. And what people are finding, a lot of men, there are a lot of men in my group who have families. I don't, but they really have to lead that family, and they have to be the leader in that family. And if they're not doing that, the whole thing kind of falls apart. And so, yeah, it's obviously, they always say it's how your daughters are going to envision how men are supposed to be, and how your sons are going to try and be. Like your sons are going to try and grow up to be like you, and your daughters are going to, their expectations of men are set by you. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I think it happens. It matters a lot in the home.
But it's interesting because, as somebody who is married and has a child, I see the need for the gang, the tribe, to be ever more important. And I can't tell you why, though, Jack, but it just seems to be that is what I find brings a sense of fulfillment.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, like I said, you can't depend on like a woman and a child for your masculine identity. That's where I think a lot of guys get into trouble. And then when they get divorced or something, their whole world falls apart, because like that, their whole identity is that group. That's why you have to have something outside that group as well. And it's also really good for, again, young men and young women, is that, okay, you're the one model of masculinity. Well, if you have a whole collective of men who you respect, now they have a handful of models. Like, this is the way that men are supposed to behave. If you have guys coming over to your house to help you move or whatever, and they see this interaction all the time, it broadens their perspective about what masculinity is supposed to be. It's not just you, but they have all these role models. And that's why I think it's really important, it's like if you have a son or something, okay, you're the one guy, but if he's seeing all these other men who are also have your values, then he's seeing a lot of good modeling to shape his character as he grows up. And that's why, like I said, I do jiu-jitsu, so I always talk about that because I'm that nerd. But I mean, that's one of the benefits of being in a place like that, is that we have these guys and they bring their teenage sons in, and dad's doing jiu-jitsu and his son's doing jiu-jitsu, and his son is also around all these other men who are respectful and behaving themselves and behaving in a very positive way. And he's getting all these other influences that are all positive. And so I think that's very important in the way that men develop.
I love what you said earlier about human nature, because you don't even have to read about it. It just seems to naturally occur. Like, for example, my wife will say to me, go on your boys' weekends. And I do, I'll go on hunting weekends or whatever. And it's just natural. And here's the thing. It's the guys who hold other guys accountable.
Well, yeah, it's almost like human nature is real, right?
Imagine that.
Imagine that. Yeah, men behave the same way all around the world. It's wild. So yeah, I mean, we're naturally hierarchical creatures, I think, more so than women, but women have their own hierarchies. But men, you'll get a group of men together, and one of them is going to be the leader, and that's just how that's going to work within that group of men. And then everybody has their role and finds their role within that group, whereas your role might be different in another group because you might have something different to offer. But in that group, you're this guy, and so it's, yeah, and they'll determine what's acceptable for that group is the way it works. Like you said, as holding each other accountable for masculinity. Every group is going to have its own, like I said, its own little details of what that means. Like the littlest thing could be like, well, our group of guys don't like this. Our group of guys don't like, I mean, that's running a men's group. It's like, we have our own little thing, like, oh, I could never let that guy in the group because what he's doing would not fly. Like, it would not fly with our group. It would fly with somebody else. But like our guys would be like, we hate this guy. Why is he here? Men need a purpose and they need responsibilities, or they generally self-destruct. I saw a quote about that the other day. Like, if you don't give a man a war to fight, he'll make war on himself. And that's not wrong. That's from the different degrees in different men, but men generally need a purpose and something, a direction. A goal, something to do. And as long as they're working towards a goal, men are doing fine. But if you give them nothing to do, which is why kind of welfare states are scary in a certain way. Like, if you give men no reason to get up in the morning, they will self-destruct. Like, they need something to move towards that they're doing. Because again, what have they been doing for thousands of years? They need to get up in the morning, go hunt food. If everything just is delivered to them, what do you do? Why be alive? Why be here? And so they become very nihilistic. And but on the topic of meaning too, I think that's something I get into a lot in my book Fire in the Dark, is that men naturally want to live in an ordered world. And so they create meaning when there is none. And that'll rub a lot of religious people the wrong way, because meaning comes from an external source. But
as opposed to yourself.
My view is that if in the absence, like Voltaire said, if God wasn't there, we'd have to create him. The same thing is true of meaning. If there's no meaning present, because there really isn't any meaning in the world, and this gets into a thorny thing where people get into nihilism and so forth. But I always say, like, I just made a video about this the other day. That's kind of my thing that I'm doing right now is YouTube. And like, a rock does not need a name to exist. We don't need it. It just exists. It doesn't need a name. All these things don't need a name to exist. All that meaning, a word is a story about a thing. Every word tells a story, and it's creating value, and it's creating, well, it's this and not that. It's exclusivity. And so we create all that stuff to make sense of our world. And so if we met and none of us spoke the same language, we would come up with grunts and clicks that came and we would remake the world. That's what men do. They need to live in an ordered world, and they will recreate it in its absence. And so people find that people get very nihilistic about that, because if there is no absolute meaning from an external source, people think that they should become nihilistic. But I think that it gives us the opportunity that men will create meaning in its absence. And so if there isn't meaning there, create it. I mean, and that becomes very freeing. And it's like, well, it's you and your group of guys would eventually recreate the whole world. And it would be slightly different, but a lot of it would be the same.
But that's the point, though. I mean, in a way, you kind of making a parallel with that story, Lord of the Flies. Where you naturally create a purpose.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what men will do. Someone told me about dogs too, and if you don't give a dog a job, it will give itself a job. They give themselves jobs without us. Like my dog's job is to obviously, I think he thinks he's supposed to be available at any time. He has to, if I get up and go to my office, my dog will get out of bed and go to the next room so he's nearby. Just to make sure. I mean, no one told him to do that. That's just what he's decided that he needs to do. It's his job. But the same way, men need to have a job, and they need to, they'll give themselves one, or like I said, they'll self-destruct.
I just want to go back to the tribes, gangs aspect, because when you say that, people kind of raise the eyebrow, like, gangs. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, and also, men relate to women differently, and women will never understand this because they're women, and we relate to them differently. But women will short circuit the group.
100%.
Basically, a woman's presence. And it's not because they're bad or doing anything wrong or whatever. It's just their presence will make men speak differently. They'll change the whole way that they relate to each other because women are present. And it's not necessarily that it's not that they're all going to talk about girls when they're gone, in fact, they usually don't, like they're not talking about that. Like, what does that mean? Like the guy like sleeping at night and the woman's on the other side. I wonder if he's thinking about me or whatever. And he's like, what happened with the Roman Empire? It's like, men are thinking about when men get together, they're talking about totally different things. They're usually not just venting about women. That's very rare. And it's only if it's like necessary for some reason, but they're talking about things that men like to talk about. That's their own interests and so forth.
But I mean, adding to that, there was a study done, and I cannot for the life of me remember where I read this. There was a study done, Jack, that they wanted to see what would happen if you added women to the front lines of a military operation, okay? And effectively, the conclusion was it would lower morale.
Yeah, well, I mean, because all their bonding, right? Like we just said that they relate to each other differently. They need to bond to be in that platoon or whatever together. And if they can't bond properly, that makes them less effective. And there is no like specific way to make them bond, but they're going to. So much of culture is jokes. Culture starts with jokes. I say like almost everything begins with like, all of a sudden, if you guys have an inside joke, then that's kind of the seed of culture. We have a whole bunch of jokes that no one else thinks are funny, but we do because we were there, and that's where culture comes from. So men have to create that, and a lot of times they won't create that with women present. Like they won't create this like internal discussion that becomes its own culture over time. And the other thing is, I mean, obviously it's nice that what's happening in America right now is that people are speaking about this now, whereas you weren't allowed to talk about this for like decades. But I mean, I've heard it from friends. I had so many people who were sought me out after The Way of Men because they read it in Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that. And so all these veterans who come back and like, they just talk about being in units with women and like what a disaster it was. And like they realize, like her street value is maybe not be that great, but her value when she's there are only 3 women and like 30 guys, their value goes up and then they used to, what do they call them? Something queens, but like all of a sudden these girls will get guys carrying all their stuff for them and all this, like, cause they're the only women there, so it short circuits a lot of things to have women present just because of men and women are different.
Jack, why is masculinity becoming, not masculinity, why are men becoming so feminized? What's going on? Is that a result of women or is that a result of other men?
Well, it's a result of other men in terms of like everything that happened, we were in charge, so everything that happened on our watch. like feminism happened on our watch, it's our fault. It's like, I mean, to a certain extent, everything is men's fault, so anything that bad happened, really, I mean, all the changes that have happened in society have been because some men at the top were like, yeah, that'll be fine. We'll just go with that. That'll work for right now. And then we live through the problems that creates. Whether it was, like the boomer kind of experiment, whether things that happened with the internet, or, like all these changes happen in society, then we have to deal with them. And obviously the reason why if men are becoming feminized is because they're being programmed in a particular way by propaganda to be, I mean, like I said, I was always, grew up, I guess, in the late 80s, early 90s. And there was already a lot of propaganda like masculinity is outdated, men are bad, you shouldn't act like a man. That's like not the right way to behave.
Toxic.
Yeah. Toxic wasn't even, they didn't even call it toxic then. It wasn't, that's like an innovation from the 2010s. But in the 70s, they called it testosterone poisoning. It was the same thing. They just recycle the same thing over and over again, but they just give it new names. But I mean, there are all these they're getting all these messages that masculinity is bad. And I think that actually probably contributed a lot to the trans thing, is that you have, if you're a young man and you've been told your entire life that being a man is a bad thing, maybe you want to be a woman. Like I think that's that's probably been an influence on a lot of the people who are confused. Well, I bet you've been telling me that I am a man, but you've been telling me that being a man is bad. So, like that's got to get in their head. Like if they've been hearing that since they were like a baby, that's got to get in their head. And so I think that's a factor. But the other thing is, obviously, there's the propaganda element of it. And then there's also the element of it that is, like just lack of challenge. Like we said, masculinity is optional. You have to seek out challenges. That's why you have all these guys doing like absurd things, whether it's ice bath things, like men's groups for a while, that was the big trend. They all get together and take ice baths, like, because they don't have anything hard in their lives. Me and my friends who have done at different times like blue collar jobs that are actually hard, like, or just like my buddy, he had the best story. He was just like, these guys are getting ice baths. Have you tried being on a ladder for 3 hours trying to fix something in the freezing rain and your pants are frozen to your leg? Have you tried that? There are a lot of jobs in the world that you can still do that are really hard. And those people just want to come home and relax. They don't need to take an ice bath. But they do other things. But there are so many men who don't have anything that's challenging in their lives. And so they need to seek that out. And that's, like if you grew up I would say like men who grew up with brothers have a little bit of an edge because they've had to compete with another guy their whole life. And so they've had to work out all those little status hierarchies and all that stuff. They've been doing that their whole lives. Whereas like I grew up with sisters. So, I'll never have that advantage. But that's why, whether people go into like combat sports and things like that, they've never had that experience and they need to have it. They need to go through that experience of figuring out that hierarchy and doing the push-pull and all that kind of stuff with different men, because that's part of how we become what we are. But it's easier not to do any of those things. In society, it's like society's telling you being a man is bad, and it's also easier to not be a man. So, well, that's your answer to like why men are becoming so effeminate. It's like society's saying it's bad to be masculine, and being masculine is hard, and men will judge you in a way that women won't. And so many men get addicted to female affirmation, which is cheap. like in the sense that like, if you look at a woman post something and a lot of it's fake too. But if a woman posts something, you get 300 other women being like, that's amazing. Amazing. Everything you do, amazing. And whereas dudes, you have to struggle to get a positive comment from a guy at all.
Dude, that was really shit. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could do anything. I mean, I would say like, because my job is to sometimes do manly stuff. I was like, if I do literally anything in the realm of masculinity and post it on Instagram, my comments will light out about how I did it wrong. Like it doesn't matter, like it'll be dudes will not be like the amount of men who will say great job.
Your squat wasn't low enough.
100%. Exactly. Like that's a perfect example. Same thing. Any of the masculine spheres, like dudes who are shooting, dudes have all kinds of opinions about that.
Yeah,
dudes who care about
too
cars,
far out.
all of it. Men will critique you to and that's kind of a little bit of an internet disease, but it's something that we do in real life, but kind of in a joking way, but in the internet, it's just obnoxious. It becomes like guys have an opinion about every little thing that you do, whereas like I said, women, it's much easier, I think, for men to be like, hey, I'm going to surround myself with women who say that everything I do is amazing. Like it's a different world, and being around men is hard.
Although it can come off as being somewhat superficial, the discussion that we're having, but it's not, because let me give you an example. I was, not too long ago, I was in Amsterdam, and I said to my wife, I saw a lot of males, but I didn't see a lot of men. And I said that, after having read your book, because I suddenly became more aware of the absolute feminization of men. They're walking around looking at their cell phones with headphones on, disconnected from reality, and would probably jump and run away if there was a fire.
Right.
not actually apply the virtues of masculinity.
Yeah, and I think it's even more than that too. I think because it's what we are, regardless, and so I think that for us to reach our potential as men, there are areas that we need to deal with, and areas, because. If you're not going to be masculine, dudes always ask me on Instagram, they ask me, how do I become more masculine? I'm like, how to become more of a man or whatever. I'm like, well, you're not a woman. So the only thing that you can do is become more of a man, or you can just be a really crappy woman. Because you're never going to be good at being a woman. So you need to get better at being a man. I think it's a good enough message for a lot of people, because it's going to make you better at being you. Because that is what you are. And so you don't have to become this caricature of masculinity where you just try and do all the manly things. It's not an outfit like that. That's where I think a lot of gays go wrong, is that they think masculinity is an outfit that you can wear. Like, oh, I'm putting on my lumberjack costume, but men value, can you actually do the thing? That's more important than the costume or the outfit. The actual ability to take action and do the thing, whatever it is. And men are very tuned to authenticity in that way. In the sense of all these, like I said, internet comments or whatever. It's like, I had a guy in a photo shoot one time. It was a photographer, and he wanted me to, he had these prop weapons, and he wanted me to hold up these weapons, and he thought that would be cool. And I was like, dude, I have so many special forces followers. I can't hold a weapon. I can't sit there and get photographed with a weapon I don't know how to use. They would slay me. Because men are I would never be photographed with a weapon that I've never fired, or a weapon that I don't know how to use. Because who are you trying to be? That, unless you're acting, unless you're literally in a play or a movie or something like that, and you're acting, then that's fine. But men respect your actual ability to do things. It's not just play act and look cute. You actually have to be able to do things. And I think that that's really important to men as well. And so, and as you're saying, dudes walking down the street, well, you can tell that they can't do certain things. You can tell that they've never been in certain kinds of situations. And there's a sliding scale. I mean, it's not like I hang out with, I have guys in my groups who are I have a guy in my group who's a Marine Raider, and I'm sure has probably killed a lot of people overseas. And, he's had that whole experience and seen some things, that I will never see in my life. I mean, we can't all, you have to do the best you can, from where you are. But you can't have every experience or be all the man things, because then you're just kind of becoming a caricature of I'm going to be the manliest man in Mantown, and you can't really be all that. And so it has to be proportionate to where you are in life. But I think it's important to go and explore those things at least. You don't have to become an MMA fighter, but you should probably know what it's like to get punched. You should probably have that experience and go do that for a little bit, and then maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. Because a lot of anything in life, right? You can try something, and maybe it's for you, and maybe it's not. But a lot of times you don't know if it's for you, because it may seem like it's not for you, and then all of a sudden you become very interested in it. I avoided jiu-jitsu for years, and now it's I really like wrestling. But I don't really like gi. You get these very specific, I like this and I don't like that, but you had to try it to find out. And so that's true of all the man things. I've done the shooting thing. I always say that I'm kind of I'm done. I'm over my shooting arc. I've done that. I've tried it out. It's not really my thing. I would do it again in the right situation, but it's not something that really calls to me, but I've been there and I've tried that and I know what it is. And I think that's important for men to do. Anything in the masculine sphere like that is men should go out and seek that out and try it out. And it helps you understand who you are as a man.
It's kind of going back to the primal and disregarding the social constructs, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent. Well, there are these primal qualities of masculinity. I think it's important to explore those because we are still the same animals. Like being a man is being this certain kind of animal. And I think it's important to see that exercised, like this exercise, that strength. And, it makes you something else. Like I always, you said you want to talk to me about workout stuff later, but for instance, I would say, like, I didn't really start working out really hard until my mid-30s, mid to late 30s. And I wouldn't have told you at 20 that I think of myself as being strong. And now it's literally part of my identity. Like that's being the strong guy is actually part of my identity and who I am. And I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known I had the potential for that or whatever had I not tried it out. And so that's part of my core identity. I don't like certain lifts to go below a certain thing. I'm actually doing that right now. I'm like, well, let's do some 50s benchmarks. I haven't deadlifted in a few years. Well, I don't like that number. That's much too low. I'm like, let's get that up again to where it was. And, and so that's part of my identity now. And that's part of who I am. And I think it's made me more of myself, like a better version of myself by exploring those areas. And like I said, not everything is for every person, but you will realize your potential, I guess, as a man that you maybe didn't think you had. And I think that's why I think it's important to explore those things.
Speaking of which, did you see a few days ago a South African won the world's strongest man?
Oh, no, I didn't see that. I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that. But South Africa's been in our news a little bit lately.
Yes, and we won't talk about that because it's highly embarrassing.
Right. Yeah. But no, I did not see that. But yeah, that's I mean, again, I've done some strongman training before, and I know what that is. It's not something I want to do all the time, but it's good to know what that feels like. So it's a cool thing.
But that's also what I find about masculinity that's so, appealing also, is the fact that I'm not interested in what women do in the gym. I'm interested in what men do in the gym, and I'm interested in how they excel. And
that's the foundation of virtue, really, is excellence. I mean, there's an interesting thing. I mean, that's kind of where my interest is now, so it captures my mind. But vir, the root word of virtue is vir, which means man. So it's basically virtue meant manliness, ancient Rome. And so it was martial manliness, all the tactical virtues, all the stuff that I'm talking about. That's what virtue meant originally. And then it met with the Greek arete. And when the Greeks influenced the Romans a lot with the gods and the other things, but also with philosophy. And so when you have Plato and everybody talking about Plato and Aristotle and so forth talking about arete, which is basically excellences. And so like those two things merged right about Cicero. right about in Cicero, those things crossed over and virtue became all these excellences and the manly things together. And maybe I'll write a book about that at some point, but that's kind of where I'm at with it, is that's the foundation of virtue is this chase of excellence and manliness at the same time.
How can I follow you?
Oh, right now, like I said, my website is www.jack-donovan.com. But right now, I think the easiest way to find me is I'm trying to produce videos every week on YouTube. So I have a Jack Donovan at YouTube. I have a channel there, and I let that sleep for a decade. And now I'm kind of trying to go and talk at least once a week on YouTube, and that's one of my new projects. So that's the best place to find where I'm most active right now. So I mean, I'm on Instagram at Start the World, and I have this group called Order of Fire at orderofire.com, and that's my whole philosophy based on my book Fire in the Dark. And obviously all my books are on Amazon, et cetera. So,
Jack Donovan, thank you for joining me in the trenches.